So, it's most likely you've heard of at least one of the stories that I'll be talking about in this video. Internet stories have become the new urban legends of our times, and one of the most interesting types of stories that I've come across over the years is that of a celebrity or a famous person who is known for being a pacifist, or in the very least, not known as being a particularly tough individual, who has a secret past that contrasts with what we think we know about them. The first story I want to talk about is the one about singer-songwriter John Denver. If you don't know who that is, let me describe him very briefly. John Denver was born Henry John Duchendorf Jr., and he began his career in the 1960s in the folk music genre. In the 1970s, he became a chart topper, producing mostly solo music albums, while he sang about the joys of country life, the sins of life in the city, and of course about his failures in relationships. Denver was also politically active and an active supporter of the Democratic Party and the environmental movement. He often spoke out about the war in Vietnam and attended and sang his songs at protests across the country. So all in all, you could say that John Denver was a folksy country boy who believed in protecting the environment and was against war and violence. John Denver sadly died in 1997 when his experimental plane crashed near Monterey Bay as he was testing it out. Now, the quite persistent rumor is that John Denver wasn't really a pacifist at all, but was in fact a military sniper with hundreds of kills during the Vietnam War. If you didn't know much about John Denver, you might think that this rumor could be in fact true. After all, he was of age during the time of the Vietnam War, and his father was in fact one of the very first officers in the Air Force when it was formed. His father retired from the military after World War II as a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. John himself is said to have wanted to join the Air Force, but couldn't because of his bad eyesight. Denver, in fact, received a military induction notice in 1964, but because of a lawnmower accident and the subsequent loss of 2 of his toes, he was ineligible for military service. So then when did this story about John Denver begin and who started it? Although it is unfortunately impossible to find out who started this rumor, it seems that the rumor was started in the 1970s and was probably started as a rebuttal against his anti-Vietnam War activism. After all, what would be a better way to negate what John Denver was preaching than to say that he was a hypocrite who was responsible for a lot of killing? And why a sniper in particular? Well, in the 70s, snipers didn't have the esteemed reputation that they have today. They were often seen as cowards that hid from danger and picked people off while being safe under cover. A lot of this dislike towards snipers probably had to do with the infamous University of Texas mass shooting, which was still fresh in people's minds in the 1970s. That tragedy, which happened on August 1st, 1966, was perpetrated by Charles Whitman, former Marine who shot and killed many people from a tower at the University of Texas. At the time, it was the biggest mass shooting in American history. Another internet rumor in the same vein is the one about Bob Keeshan. Who is Bob Keeshan, you ask? Well, he was much better known as Captain Kangaroo, a children's television show host whose show was on television from 1955 to 1984. The show was of an educational variety that included puppets and various characters that the captain would interact with in order to educate children. One of the few segments that I really remember from the show is when he would read from storybooks. This segment, called Storytime, was quite enchanting to me as a child. In these segments, the captain would simply read from the book as pictures from the story were shown on screen. Because of this show and Reading Rainbow, I have always been an avid reader. So the rumor goes as follows. One night on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, Carson had a guest by the name of Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin was an actor who had played many tough guy roles and often played characters that were in the military. Johnny supposedly mentioned that Marvin was a war hero himself, having fought in World War II. Marvin said that he didn't see himself as a hero, but that he had met many heroes during the war. And one of the biggest heroes, he said, was the Beachmaster, who was responsible for directing the landing craft on Iwo Jima. This man had to stand on a hill with red flags and direct troop landings, all while being shot at by Japanese troops. Just imagine, bullets are flying every which way, and there you are, defenseless, with bright red flags, making you a very easy-to-see target. Marvin is purported to have said the real hero he knew was this guy whose name was Bob Keeshan, aka Captain Kangaroo. As wonderful as this rumor sounds, it is unfortunately not true. Lee Marvin was in fact a war hero who even received a Purple Heart during World War II, but Bob Keeshan, however, never actually made it out of the United States during the war because of his age. He enlisted too late. Not only did Lee Marvin never actually tell this story on The Tonight Show, but he himself never made it to Iwo Jima, having been injured during the Battle of Saipan. This rumor is so persistent that it was even recently talked about by legendary actor Tom Hanks in an interview with the great history podcaster Dan Carlin. Although Tom Hanks said the story may not have been true, his telling of the story will undoubtedly cause many more people to believe in the myth, especially since Dan Carlin did nothing to dispel the myth on his podcast, Hardcore History Addendum. I love Dan Carlin and Tom Hanks, but come on guys, I'm disappointed in you both. It's difficult to pinpoint when this rumor began, but it was probably the result of someone misremembering an interview they had seen on The Tonight Show. Similar rumors have been attributed to other children's TV show stars, including Mr. Rogers, and of course they are also false. Alright, hope you enjoyed this video, thanks for watching, please subscribe and be good to each other.